Alright, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, grab a warm drink, because it is rather on the chilly side, and get ready to jump back where we left off. Welcome back. This is our fourth and should be final night of reading from In the Yule Long Glow, a collection of short Christmas stories from around the world. Different cultures, different times, different places and ideas, but all together, coming together to appreciate and observe the holiday that is so near upon us. So, let's look back for just a minute. We do have a little bit of time tonight at some of the stories we've seen so far in this collection. We saw the very French retelling of the Three Wise Men and their history and story. Had a decidedly crusaderish tint. And then we had the telling of last time of the two turkeys, or the tale of the turkey, the very surprising twist midway where we were thought that the central character was going to be fine, thought his boss was going to be better than Scrooge, and wow, were we let down in that assumption. And before that, we had the, yes, hello, Simba. Before that, we had the other retellings of the, the Russian story that I could not pronounce a lick of, which, that's half the fun anyway, right? So, tonight we have before us two more stories. One, a Norse setting, and the latter from the deserts of the East. Yeah, somehow we found a worse rich person than Scrooge, which was crazy. I guess since it was from the perspective of the clerk, there didn't need to be redemption. Whereas from Christmas Carol, it was from Scrooge's perspective. So the whole thing was about redemption and reformation. So, I guess it all matters where the central focus is. Yeah, it is what it is. So, let's look forward to tonight and see what else we have to get up to. What other sort of business, what other sort of stories, what other sort of troubles there will be going around for the holidays. And hopefully, we can have a little bit, a little bit less of a downer as we go through and finish up this collection of stories and ease our way into the last week before Christmas. So, let us resume now with Rond, the next to last story in the Yule Long Glow. A Norseman's Saga. Well, so, before you get your hopes up too high, remember, this is a collection, there are 4 volumes in this. I don't know if they were all published sequentially, like year after year, or if this was one giant volume that was collected and then broken up. So, if it was the latter, where it was originally one thing, we might not have a clean finish tonight. But if it was the former, if it was specifically meant to be, different years' readings, then we might be alright. Hopefully. Maybe. I don't know if I can take another night like last night. That was awfully depressing for just before the holidays. Save that for real life, thank you very much. Alright, so, with that wonderfully optimistic note, let's continue with Thrond. A Norseman's Saga. As he sat there with a sou'wester down over his ears, in a long pilot coat, his figure appeared to assume quite supernatural proportions, and you might almost imagine that you had one of the old Vikings before you. Asbjornsen. There was once a man named Alf, who had raised great expectations among his fellow parishioners, because he excelled most of them, both in the work he accomplished, and in the advice he gave. Now, When this man was 30 years old, he went to live up the mountain and cleared a piece of land for farming, about 14 miles from any settlement. Many people wondered how he could endure thus depending on himself for companionship, but they were still more astonished when, a few years later, a young girl from the valley, and one too who had been the gayest of the gay at all the social gatherings and dances of the parish, was willing to share his solitude. This couple were called the People of the Wood, and the man was known by the name of Alf in the Wood. People viewed him with inquisitive eyes when they met him at church or at work, because they did not understand him. But neither did he take the trouble to give them any explanation of his conduct. His wife was only seen in the parish twice, and on one of these occasions it was to present a child for baptism. This child was a son, and he was called Thronged. When he grew larger, his parents often talked about needing help, and, as they could not afford to take a full-grown servant, they hired what they called a half. They brought into their house a girl of 14, who took care of the boy while the father and mother were busy in the field. This girl was not the brightest person in the world, and the boy soon observed that his mother's words were easy to comprehend, but that it was hard to get at the meaning of what Ragnhild said. He never talked much with his father, and he was rather afraid of him. The house had to be kept very quiet when he was home. One Christmas Eve, they were burning 2 candles on the table, and the father was drinking from a white flask. The father took the boy up in his arms and set him on his lap, looked him sternly in the eyes, and exclaimed, "Boy!" Then he added more gently, "Why, you are not so much afraid. Would you have the courage to listen to a story?" The boy made no reply, but he looked full in his father's face. His father then told him about a man from Vaj, whose name was Blessem. This man was in Copenhagen for the purpose of getting the king's verdict in a lawsuit he was engaged in, and he was detained so long that Christmas Eve overtook him there. Blessem was greatly annoyed at this, and as he was sauntering about the streets fancying himself at home, he saw a very large man in a white short coat walking in front of him. "How fast you are walking," said Blessem. "I have a long distance to go in order to get home this evening," replied the man. "Where are you going?" "To Vaj," answered the man, and walked on. "Well, that is very nice," said Blessem, "but that is where I am going too." "Well then, you may ride with me, if you will stand on the runners of my sledge," answered the man, and turned into a side street, where his horse was standing. He mounted his seat and looked over his shoulder at Blessem, who was just getting on the runners. "You had better hold fast," said the stranger. Blessem did as he was told, and indeed it was well that he did, for their journey was evidently not by land. It seems to me that you are driving on the water," cried Blessem. "I am," said the man, and the spray whirled about them. After a while, it seemed to Blessem their course no longer lay on the water. "It seems to me we are moving through the air," said he. "Yes, so we are," replied the stranger. But when they had gone still further, Blessem thought he recognized the parish they were driving through. "Is this not Vaj?" cried he. "Yes, now we are there," replied the stranger, and it seemed to Blessem they had gone pretty fast. "Thank you for the good ride," said he. "Thanks to yourself," replied the man, and added as he whipped up his horse, "Now, you had better not look after me." "No, indeed," thought Blessem, and started over the hills for home. Just then, so loud and terrible a crash was heard behind him that it seemed as if the whole mountain must be tumbling down, and a bright light was shed over the surrounding landscape. He looked around and beheld the stranger in the white coat driving through the crackling flames into the open mountain, which was yawning wide to receive him, like some huge gate. Blessem felt something strange in regard to his traveling companion, and thought he would look in another direction. But as he had turned his head, so it remained, and never more could Blessem get it right again. Typo on the text there. Threw me off. The boy had never heard anything to equal this in all his life. He dared not ask his father for more, but early the next morning, he asked his mother if she knew any stories. Yes, of course she did, but hers were chiefly about princesses who were in captivity for 7 years, until the right prince came along. The boy believed that everything he heard or read about took place close around him. He was about 8 years old when the first stranger entered their door one winter evening. He had black hair, and this was something Thrawn had never seen before. Reminder that Scandinavians are usually blonde. The stranger saluted them with a short "good evening" and came forward. Thrawn grew frightened and sat down on a cricket by the hearth. The mother asked the man to take a seat on the bench along the wall. He did so, and then the mother could examine his face more closely. "Dear me! Is not this Nud the Fiddler?" cried she. "Yes, to be sure it is. It has been a long time since I played at your wedding." "Oh, yes, quite. It is quite a while now. Have you been on a long journey?" "I have been playing for Christmas on the other side of the mountain. Halfway down the slope, I began to feel very badly. I was obliged to come in here to rest." The mother brought forward food for him. He sat down to the table, but did not say, "In the name of Jesus," as the boy had been accustomed to hear. When he had finished eating, he got up from the table and said, "Now I feel very comfortable. Let me rest a little while." And he was allowed to rest on Thrawn's bed. For Thrawn, a bed was made on the floor. As the boy lay there, he felt cold on the side that was turned away from the fire, and that was the left side. He discovered that it was because this side was exposed to the chill night air, for he was lying out in the wood. How came he in the wood? He got up and looked about him and saw that there was a fire burning a long distance off, and that he was actually alone in the wood. He longed to go home to the fire, but could not stir from the spot. Then a great fear overcame him, for wild beasts might be roaming about, trolls and ghosts might appear to him. He must get home to the fire. He could not stir from the spot. Then his terror grew. He strove with all his might to gain self-control, and was at last able to cry, "Mother!" And then he awoke. Yeah, perfect. Thrawn has night paralysis demons. Awesome. Cool. "Dear child, you have had bad dreams," she said, and took him up. A shudder ran through him, and he glanced around. The stranger was gone, and he dared not inquire after him. His mother appeared in her black dress, and started for the parish. She came home with 2 new strangers, who also had black hair and who wore flat caps. They did not say "in the name of Jesus" when they ate, and they talked in low tones with the father. Afterwards, the latter and they went into the barn, and came out again with a large box, which the men carried between them. They placed it on a sled and said farewell. Then the mother said, "Wait a little, and take with you the smaller box he brought here with him." And she went in to get it, but one of the men said, "He can have that," and pointed at Thrawn. "Use it well, and use it as well as he who is now lying here," added the other stranger, pointing at the large box. Then they both laughed and went out. Thrawn looked at the little box which came into his possession. "What is there in it?" asked he. "Carry it in and find out," said the mother. He did as he was told, but his mother helped him open it. Then a great joy lighted up his face, for he saw something very light and fine lying there. "Take it up," said his mother. He put just one finger down on it, but quickly drew it back again in great alarm. "It cries," said he. "Have courage," said his mother. And he grasped it with his whole hand and drew it forth from the box. He weighed it and turned it round, and laughed and felt of it. "Dear me, what is it?" asked he, for it was as light as a toy. "It is a fiddle." This was the way that Thrond Alfson got his first violin. That's a twist I didn't really expect. I'm not sure really what I expected from the box, but yeah, you know what? Sure. The father could play a little, and he taught the boy how to handle the instrument. The mother could sing the tunes she remembered from her dancing days, and these the boy learned, but soon began to make new ones for himself. He played all the time he was not at his books. He played until his father once told him he was fading away before his eyes. All the boy had read and heard until that time was put into the fiddle. The tender, delicate string was his mother. The one that lay close beside it, and always accompanied his mother, was Ragnhild. The coarse string, which he seldom ventured to play on, was his father. But of the last solemn string he was half afraid, and he gave no name to it. When he played a wrong note on the E string, it was the cat. But when he took a wrong note on his father's string, it was the ox. The bow was Blessum, who drove from Copenhagen to Vaj in one night, and every tune he played represented something. The one containing the long, solemn tones was his mother in her black dress. The one that jerked and skipped was like Moses, who stuttered and smote the rock with his staff. The one that had to be played quietly, with the bow moving lightly over the strings, was the Hulder in yonder fog, calling together her cattle, where no one but herself could see. But the music wafted him onward over the mountains, and a great yearning took possession of his soul. One day, when his father told about a little boy who had been playing at the fair, and who had earned a great deal of money, Thrond waited for his mother in the kitchen and asked her softly if he could not go to the fair and play for people. "Who ever heard of such a thing?" said his mother, but she immediately spoke to his father about it. "He will get out into the world soon enough," answered the father, and he spoke in such a way that the mother did not ask again. Shortly after this, the father and mother were talking at table about some new settlers who had recently moved up on the mountain and were about to be married. They had no fiddler for the wedding, the father said. "Could I not be the fiddler?" whispered the boy, when he was alone in the kitchen once more with his mother. "What? A little boy like you?" said she. But she went out to the barn where his father was and told him about it. "He has never been to the parish." He has never been in the parish," she added. "He has never seen a church." "I should not think you would ask about such things," said Alf, but neither did he say anything more, and so the mother thought she had permission. Consequently, she went over to the new settlers and offered the boy's services. "The way he plays," said she, "no little boy has ever played before." And the boy was allowed to come. What joy there was at home! Thrond played from morning until evening and practiced new tunes. At night he dreamed about them. They bore him far over the hills, away to foreign lands, as though he were afloat on sailing clouds. His mother made a new suit of clothes for him, but his father would not take part in what was going on. The last night he did not sleep, but thought out a new tune about the church which he had never seen. He was up early in the morning, and so was his mother, in order to get him his breakfast, but he could not eat. He put on his new clothes and took his fiddle in his hand, and it seemed to him as though a bright light were glowing before his eyes. His mother accompanied him out on the flagstone and stood watching him as he ascended the slopes. It was the first time he had left home. His father got quietly out of bed and walked to the window. He stood there, following the boy with his eyes until he heard the mother out on the flagstone. Then he went back to bed and was lying down when she came in. She kept stirring about him as if she wanted to relieve her mind of something, and finally it came out. "I really think I must walk down to the church and see how things are going." He made no reply, and therefore she considered the matter settled, dressed herself, and started. It was a glorious sunny day. The boy walked rapidly onward. He listened to the song of the birds and saw the sun glittering among the foliage. While he proceeded on his way, with his fiddle under his arm. And then he reached the bride's house. He was still so occupied with his own thoughts that he observed neither the bridal splendor nor the procession. He merely asked if they were about to start, and learned that they were. He walked on in advance with his fiddle, and he played the whole morning into it, and the tones he produced resounded through the trees. "Will we soon see the church?" he asked over his shoulder. For a long time he received only "no" for an answer, but at last someone said, "As soon as you reach that crag yonder, you will see it." He threw his newest tune into the fiddle, and the bow danced on the strings, and he kept his eyes fixed intently before him. There lay the parish, right in front of him. The first thing he saw was a little light mist, curdling like smoke on the opposite mountainside. His eyes wandered over the green meadow and the large houses, with windows which glistened beneath the scorching rays of the sun, like the glacier on a winter's day. The houses kept increasing in size, the windows in number, and here, on one side of him, lay the enormous red house, in front of which horses were tied. Little children were playing on a hill, dogs were sitting watching them, but everywhere there penetrated a long, heavy tone that shook him from head to foot, and everything he saw seemed to vibrate with that tone. Then, suddenly, he saw a large, straight house with a tall, glittering staff reaching up to the skies, and below 100 windows blazed, so that the house seemed to be enveloped in flames. This must be the church, the boy thought, and the music must come from it. Round about stood a vast multitude of people, and they all looked alike. He put them forthwith into relations with the church, and thus acquired a respect, mingled with awe, for the smallest child he saw. "Now I must play," thought Thrond, and tried to do so. But what was this? The fiddle no longer had any sound in it. There must be some defect in the strings. He examined, but he could find none. Then it must be because I did not press on hard enough. And he drew his bow with a firmer hand, but the fiddle seemed as if it were cracked. He changed the tune that was meant to represent the church into another, with equally bad results. No music was produced, only squeaking and wailing. He felt the cold sweat start out over his face. He thought of all these wise people who were standing there, perhaps laughing him to scorn. This boy who at home could play so beautifully, but who here failed to bring out a single tone. It's alright, kid. Performance anxiety gets the all of us. "Thank God that Mother is not here to see my shame," said he softly to himself, as he played among the people. But lo, there she stood in her black dress, and she shrank farther and farther away. At that moment, he beheld far up on the spire the black-haired man who had given him the fiddle. "Give it back to me now!" "Give it back to me!" he now shouted, laughing and stretching out his arms. And the spire went up and down with him, up and down. But the boy took the fiddle under one arm, screaming, "You shall not have it!" and turning, ran away from the people, beyond the houses, onward, through meadow and field, until his strength forsook him, and then sank to the ground. There he lay for a long time with his face toward the earth, and when finally he looked round, he saw and heard only God's infinite blue sky that floated above him, with its everlasting sough. This was so terrible to him that he had to turn his face to the ground again. When he raised his head once more, his eyes fell on the fiddle, which lay at his side. "This is all your fault!" shouted the boy, and seized the instrument with the intention of dashing it to pieces, but hesitated as he looked at it. "We have had many a happy hour together," said he, then paused. Presently he said, "The strings must be severed, for they are worthless," then took out a knife and cut. "Oh!" cried the E-string in a short, pained tone. The boy cut. "Oh!" wailed the next. But the boy cut. "Oh!" said the third mournfully. And he paused at the fourth. A sharp pain seized him. That fourth string, to which he never dared give a name, he did not cut. Now, a feeling came over him that it was not the fault of the strings that he was unable to play. And just then he saw his mother walking slowly up the slope toward where he was lying, that she might take him home with her. A greater fright than ever overcame him. He held the fiddle by the severed strings, sprang to his feet, and shouted down to her, "No, mother! I will not go home again until I can play what I have seen today." And that is the end of Thrond. I'm not entirely sure, aside from, that one little bit where the man was whisked away, presumably on a Norse Santa's sleigh, back home. I'm not sure how this one really fits as a Christmas story. There's a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of childish anxiety, and, he's playing a dead man's fiddle, who'd died in their barn, or died in his bed, actually, I should say. So, there's that. So, that's an interesting story to start us off tonight, that's for certain. I won't say that it's as depressing or off-putting as the ones we had yesterday, but not quite the uplifting note that I was hoping for. Alright, well, I think we only have one story left. And it's probably a bit of a doozy if I'm looking at this right, because we still have about 15% left of the book. So, let me just get a look ahead real quick. Yeah, we got a little bit here. So, that's fine. I'm cool with this one being longer. But we might end up a little early tonight, and that's fine. I expected it to actually have to run over, but splitting this into 4 was definitely the right call. I think if we'd done it in 3, we'd have had 3 very long nights, whereas with 4, it's a comfortable 4-day read. Alright, so let's continue now with Christmas in the Desert, as contributed by an Oriental traveler. A great long devil of a Spahi, and in his red burnous, Dode. So this one we will definitely have a bit of we'll have to take a break partway through at our usual time, just to make sure that we don't strain ourselves. It'd be silly. We're getting up on the holidays. So, let's continue, or let's start in with the last story in this collection, Christmas in the Desert. Chapter 1. It seemed all too good to be true. The rest from labor, the swift flight across southern seas, the landing amid strange dark faces on a burnished shore, the slow, delicious journey through tamarisk groves and palm forests, and the halt in the desert that came at last. I had been doing for the last 12 months what young artists and authors are constantly doing, to their own ruin and the justifiable ill humor of critics, namely, working against the grain. A sweet, generous, and beautiful patroness, seeing me on the high road to brain fever or hopeless mediocrity, stepped forward in time and sent me to the desert. If ever I achieve anything excellent, it will be owing to that lady, the Vittoria Colonna, her humble Michelangelo. My little sister Mary came with me, and when I tell you that she was a teacher in a school, you will easily understand what an intoxicating thing it was for her to see a new world every day, and have nothing to do from morning till night. The poor child could hardly believe in an existence without Czerny's scales being played on 3 or 4 pianos at once, and a barrel organ and a brass band in the street. "Oh, Tom," she would say to me a dozen times a day, "I've got C-scale, and weight for wagon on my brain, and can't get rid of them." So that I verily believe to my beautiful Vittoria Colonna Mary's present well-being is due as much as my own. We halted at a little military station on the borders of the Great Sahara about a week before Christmas Day. The weather was perfect, and not too warm. A delicious, mellow atmosphere enveloped palm and plain and mosque, the air blown across thousands and thousands of acres of wild thyme and rosemary, refreshed us like wine. We seemed to have new souls and new bodies given us, and were as free from care as the swallows flying overhead. Travelers never came to Tishun, as this little oasis is called, but we had placed ourselves under the guidance of an enterprising Frenchman who transacted all sorts of business on the road between Mascara and Figgig, the last French post in the desert. His name was Dominique, and I shall always look upon him as the most remarkable man I ever knew. He was as witty as Sidney Smith, as clever at expediences as Robinson Crusoe, as shrewd a politician as Machiavelli, as apt at languages as Mezzofanti, and as brave as Garibaldi. Being a bachelor, Dominique was nonetheless ready to receive us, and, with the help of an old Corsican named Napoleon, made us very comfortable. When Dominique was carrying his Imperial Majesty's mails to some remote station southward, or had gone to an Arab fair to buy cattle, Napoleon catered for us and cooked for us, and did both admirably. Both master and servant spiced their dishes plentifully with that mother wit, never seen in such perfection as in crude colonies, where people without it would fare so ill. Well, remember, this is an artist. They're all about name drops. What are we to do for society, poor mademoiselle? Asked Dominique, as he served our first dinner. Monsieur can amuse himself with the officers of the garrison, but there are no ladies there. Here. When my brother is out, I shall stay at home and talk to Napoleon, Mary said, with a mock assumption of dignity. I don't want to be amused, Monsieur Dominique. Mon Dieu, mademoiselle, the officers of the garrison will fall in love with you, and that ought to amuse you better than talking to Napoleon, Dominique answered. It's a very dull life that they lead here, these poor officers. And if it weren't for hunting gazelles and hyenas and playing the deuce with the Arabs, they'd die of envy. But a pretty young lady like you will turn their heads soon enough. Mary blushed, and tried to turn the conversation. What do they do with themselves all day long? She asked. I'll tell you that quickly enough, mademoiselle. Monsieur le Commandant has to see that the Cadi gets what he can out of the sheiks, and the sheiks get what they can out of the tribes, and that the tribes hold their tongue. That is what the Commandant has to do, young lady, and he does it pretty well. Monsieur le Capitaine has an easier time of it, except when there is an insurrection. And then he makes a raid against the Arabs, and after keeping his men out of their way very cleverly, sticks up the French flag somewhere in the desert and comes home. Monsieur le Lieutenant does odd jobs for the Commandant and the Capitaine, and plays the flute. But we have got Monsieur le Général down here for a few days, and he is getting everybody to work. I dare say the end of it will be an expedition into the desert. You may look, monsieur. I'm not talking at random, I assure you. Generals love war as umbrella makers love bad weather, and it is easier to make people fight than it is to make it rain. It's a spot of wisdom right there, actually. Damn, okay. Calm down, Dominique. We don't need to get real right now. I think French officers must be a wicked set. I hope none of them will come near us, Mary said. The poor Arabs! How my heart bleeds for them. Yes, mademoiselle, there is no reason for your heart to bleed. Big flies live on little ones all the world over. And if the French eat up the Arabs eat up each other. The officers are very nice, harmless gentlemen, I assure you. And as to the Commandant, though he thinks fighting the best fun in the world, he wouldn't hurt a fly. To see him pet his little gazelle would make you cry. She's the only lady in the place, and I believe if she died, it would break his heart. But people must have something to be fond of. My old Napoleon yonder has taken a fancy to a cat, and when the cat dies, Napoleon will be as lost as his namesake the Emperor was at St. Helena. Listen a moment. That's the lieutenant practicing on his flute. He has a little lodging next door. The lieutenant played very prettily, and Mary seemed to like his playing much better than Dominique's stories. As her room adjoined the lieutenant's, she seemed likely to have the full benefit of his musical capacities. But I do not think she lay awake to be serenaded that night. We were fairly intoxicated with the sweet air of the desert we had been breathing all day, and went to bed at 8 o'clock, too tired and happy to dream. Next morning, Dominique informed us that he himself had delivered our letter of introduction to Monsieur le Commandant, who promised to wait upon us in the course of the day. Not knowing at what hour we might expect him, we set to work immediately after breakfast to prepare my room for the reception of so distinguished a visitor. I helped Mary as well as I was able, and, when nothing remained to do but the dusting, I retired into a recess to trim my beard. An Englishwoman is never so well dressed as when she emerges from her bedroom at early morning, and I must say that Mary looked the daintiest little housewife possible to conceive, as she went about dusting and polishing in a pink cambric dress and tiny black apron. But, neat as she was, and neat as my beard and the room were in a fair way of becoming, we were overwhelmed with surprise and confusion at what followed. Quite suddenly, the door was thrown open, and there was a military tramp and a rattling of a sword outside, and Dominique exclaimed in a voice of thunder, "Monsieur le Commandant!" Impassible self-possession is a beautiful quality, and while Mary and I stood blushing and aghast like school-children caught at stealing cherries, Monsieur le Commandant had made a courteous speech, welcoming us to Teshoo. Then we all sat down, and Monsieur le Commandant talked to us. He was a sunburned, soldierly man about 55, with a rough manner but a kind smile, and we felt at home with him in a moment. "I presume that Monsieur wishes to see as much of the country as possible," he said, "and I shall be enchanted to place at Monsieur's disposal horses, and my servant and a spy as guides. But what will Mademoiselle do while her brother is away? I must send her my little gazelle to play with her." "My sister will like to go with me, where it is practicable," I said. The Commandant opened his eyes, and looked at Mary much as one looks upon a pretty little duckling or a year-old baby. "Monsieur is evidently jesting," he answered. "Mademoiselle would be too fatigued to undertake such journeys." "I don't think so," Mary said. "I have no fear, monsieur, and I like to be with my brother." "Ha ha! What courage you English ladies have! Well, mademoiselle, we will find you a quiet horse, and make everything as pleasant as possible." And after inviting us to dine with him one evening, and bidding us to make use of him in every possible way, he took leave of us. "How nice he is!" cried Mary, as soon as the door was closed. "If all French officers were like this one, Tom, I think we shall not care how long we stay in the desert." "Your heart has very quickly ceased to bleed for the poor Arabs, I see." "But how can we be sure that Dominique's stories are all true? No, Tom, I won't believe in any harm of this kind-looking Commandant. I only wish he had not come till the room was tidied, and I got on a muslin frock. But as we are sure of having no more visitors, I'll finish your room and then unpack." We were fairly at our work again, when another military step sounded, and another sword rattled in the passage outside. This time, Dominique's arm swung back the door with less pomposity, and Dominique's voice was a trifle less emphatic as he ushered in Monsieur le Capitaine. Again, Mary and I scuttled about like young rabbits, and then stood still, staring shyly, and again our embarrassment was met by the calmest nonchalance. The second figure was a man of much more presence than the Commandant. He had the polished, general, graceful ease of a man of the world, and, though quite as good-natured as the Commandant, his good nature pleased us less, because it was less spontaneous. "I hope you will stay some time at Teshoo," he said, looking at Mary. "The ennui of our lives here is terrible. Think of it, mademoiselle. We have no theatre, no music, no society, and no domestic life. To find a lady here is like the miraculous advent of an angel." Mary blushed, and had no courage to make the sprightly answer she had made the Commandant. The fine air and grand compliments of the Capitaine overcame the little thing, but she looked distractingly pretty as she sat opposite to him, smiling and blushing when he addressed her, and only saying, "Oui, monsieur," or "Non, monsieur," or at most, "Vraiment, monsieur." "Does mademoiselle ride?" asked the gallant captain. "Oui, monsieur." "Then mademoiselle shall ride my little Barb. There's hardly such a horse anywhere, mademoiselle. So docile, so sweet-tempered, and so sure-footed. It is not every lady I would trust with my little horse, but I know how an Englishwoman can sit in the saddle, and I am proud to offer it to mademoiselle." Je vous remercie bien, monsieur. Okay, now we're throwing full French sentences at me. I thought we were reading about the desert. Well, colonialism. The colonists again! Then the Capitan talked of Christmas Day. We will have a little fete champêtre in Mademoiselle's honor, he said. We will go to the great waterfalls of Boissel-Cabir and breakfast there. I will invite my commandant and all the officers of the garrison. Monsieur can make a sketch and Mademoiselle could gather flowers. That is fair. My Arabic is probably every bit as bad as my Russian. So, I guess we should be blessed by French. Oh, did I say that? Oh. We expressed ourselves delighted at the proposal, and after promising to send Mary ostrich eggs and jackal skins to take to England, the Capitan left us. I don't like the Capitan as well as the Commandant, Mary said, but how kind they all are to us. It is as if we were princes on a journey of triumph. Oh, Tom, what days to remember are these? I think your head will be fairly turned with what the Commandant's dinners and the Capitan's fete champêtres, I said. And if the Lieutenant... Monsieur le Lieutenant, announced Dominique, opening the door calmly, as if nothing was the matter. We had been twice so shocked and surprised that we had no more embarrassment to expend on the Lieutenant. Indeed, he was rather shy himself, which was the very thing to reassure a warm-hearted, sympathetic little creature like my sister. And they began to talk together without any effort. He was young, handsome, with a very frank, pleasant expression. I am afraid that it is useless for me to offer my poor services, he said, very modestly, my superior officers having forestalled me, but it will make me very happy to do anything for you. If Mademoiselle would like any stuffed birds or dried flowers and plants, it will give me pleasure to procure them for her. And perhaps Monsieur would like me to show him some wonderful things to paint. I draw a little myself, and know where the finest points of view are to be found. We thanked him heartily, and accepted all that he offered us. As it was now time for our second breakfast, or more properly speaking lunch, we pressed him to partake of it with us, which he did. We should not have ventured upon inviting the Commandant, much less the Capitan, so unceremoniously, but the Lieutenant's diffident manner had set us quite at our ease. I have a very humble apartment, he said, but if Monsieur and Mademoiselle will visit me, I will do the honors of it with pride and pleasure. I can at least offer them a little music. Yes, I know that you play, Mary said, smiling. Our rooms join, and I heard you playing before you went to sleep last night. Oh, Mademoiselle, I shall never forgive myself if I disturbed you. No, indeed you did not, Monsieur. Much as I liked the music, I was too tired to listen to it, and went to sleep all the same. They both laughed gleefully like children, and the Lieutenant promised to play to her and send her to sleep every night. After breakfast, he accompanied us on a tour of inspection. We soon saw all that there was to see of the Shul, namely, a little line of bazaars kept by Jews and Negroes, a little boulevard of a year's growth, two imposing-looking gates, one looking towards Morocco, one towards the Sahara, a straggling camp, and a wall of circumvallation. There were gardens in embryo here and there, but no trees of any size, and not until you had got fairly away from Tishun could you perceive that its aspect was striking or imposing. Then, looking back from the craggy heights that surrounded it, the white line of the camp and the belt of verdure encircling it like a ribbon struck the eye as a pleasant contrast to the warm, yellow atmosphere of earth and sky. The warmth and the yellowness were delicious. A fresh, sweet breeze blew across our faces from the desert. We sat down and drew it in with long, devouring breaths. 100 yards behind us, his bright brown body sharply outlined against the pale amber-colored sky, stood a little Bedouin smiling down upon us. It was a perfect personification of Eastern life, and I made a sketch, while the Lieutenant told Mary of his hard campaign southward, and his joy at catching the first glimpse of Tishun from the distance. When we returned home, we found that the Commandant's servant had left a bunch of roses for Mary, with his master's compliments, and that the Capitan's servant had been sent round with his master's horse for her to try. and that the General had sent word by his aide-de-camp that he would himself have the pleasure of calling upon us that evening. Alright, so Dominique was not joking. These guys are really, really starved for attention. If all the way up to a general is just stopping by to visit two traveling artists, or an artist and his sister, I'd say get a life, but they're in the middle of the desert, so fair. Mary and I felt utterly overwhelmed by such goodness and condescension. A real starred lace general was about to call on us. We could hardly believe that we were our identical, insignificant selves, who, but for you, oh, most sweet and honored patroness, would have sunk even under the burden of toil imposed upon us. But how all was changed. The poor unknown artist was treated as if he had been St. Peter Paul Rubens. The humble little schoolteacher was feted and flattered like the wife of a conquering commander-in-chief. Yeah, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, military life is, periods of chaos followed by extreme stretches of boredom. So, this, you're right, this tracks perfectly, actually. We'd invited the young lieutenant to drink tea with us at 8 o'clock, and were enjoying a little music after a very sociable fashion, when a noisy excitement seemed to shake the house like a shock of an earthquake, and Monsieur le General was announced in Dominique's most impressive manner. Monsieur le General was by no means an awful-looking person, and indeed, we had so expected our surprise already that we had no more at command. He was an excessively stout, merry person, middle-aged, of a beautiful complexion, and a capacity to wink that would have vulgarized anyone but a general. He made himself very pleasant, accepted a cup of tea, praised Mary's French, said that he intended to dine with us at the Commandant's tomorrow, and told us some laughable stories about the Arabs. I noticed that the lieutenant seemed quite overawed by the presence of the General, and sat flute in hand like a statue. Mary tried to put him at his ease, but to no purpose. It did not mend matters when the General began first to twit him about his musical accomplishments, and then to catechize him on military matters. "You were in that affair of '59 in Cape there, weren't you?" he asked in that quick, positive military tone to which we, with difficulty, get accustomed. Oh, we have a picture here, so one moment, we'll get that one loaded up. These pictures on this one do tend to surprise me, because this doesn't really feel like much of a picture sort of work, but I will take it. Alright, and pull that up. Ah, we have the sister. My little sister Mary. It looks like she'll be very popular with the French military men. Alright, and back to the conversation between the general and the lieutenant. Oui, mon general. It was a badly managed thing, I believe. The Kabyles got the better of you more than once, didn't they? I believe so, mon general. Bah! Cried the general, turning to me. You see what these young officers know of their trade. I have no doubt that Monsieur le Lieutenant's musical education is much more advanced, and to serenade Mademoiselle suits him much better than to make war against the enemies of his country. And at the mention of the enemies of his country, the general indulged in a wink. When he was ready to go, he sent the lieutenant to order his horse, much as if he had been a little boy of 10 years old, and on taking leave added half a dozen commissions in the same peremptory tone. The poor lieutenant listened very submissively, but no sooner had the general dashed down the street, followed by his servant, equally well mounted, than he grew gay and easy again. As soon as we were alone, Mary brought out her slender supply of gala dresses, and we discussed the important subject of her toilet of the next evening. It seems to me, I said, that if you dress for the lieutenant, you will displease the capitaine. If you dress for the capitaine, you will displease the commandant, and if you dress for the commandant, you will displease the general. Mary gathered up her fineries in alarm. "Don't you think I had better stay away from the dinner altogether, Tom?" "By no means," I said. "Settle the matter by dressing to please me." Which she accordingly did, and the result was a semi-moresque, dainty, and glowing bit of costume, quite in keeping with the time and place. I would assume that that's what we have pictured here. She's avoiding dressing for the strangers by dressing to fit the family, which actually is a reasonable way to take this. Don't insult any of the, not really potential suitors, but the important people of the camp. And, because really, if you're trying to appease your brother, then no one's gonna complain about your getup, right? All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 1. So let's go ahead and have a short break here. It's a little bit early, but I don't know if we've got another chapter. Actually, now I'll look forward and see if we've got another chapter in this. Nope, there is not another chapter. So we will have a short break here, and when we get back, after topping up our drinks, stretching our legs and such, we'll come back to the home stretch and have the last chapter of this volume entirely. All right, so be back in just a few minutes. Thanks, guys. Alright, we are back. So, before we jump back in, we can reflect a little bit. We had the start of the night with the Norse story that was barely a Christmas story. There was a little reference of a father telling his son a vaguely Christmassy story. And it was vastly overshadowed by a poor boy getting absolutely crushed by anxiety and a little bit of, sleep paralysis. Nothing to worry about. It's the sort of thing that just happens when you play a dead man's fiddle, particularly when said dead man dies in your bed. Nothing says a Christmas story like deep-seated trauma. But this next story seems to be a fair bit more lighthearted. We've got the brother and sister traveling under the generous... Usually the traumas involved in the holidays are rooted in family. Not so much the strangers. It's, an uncle who's had far too much to drink. It's a, passing around of white elephant gifts that are far from appropriate for the children. Many and such similar atrocities. So, we'll give that one a pass, because you know what? The Norse, they're going to do their own thing. But usually it's family that are giving you the trauma. Alright. Speaking of family, we have here the brother and sister out in the Saharan desert, in the French colonies at the time, and they're in and among the officer corps at this point, not so much the enlisted men, and doing pretty well for themselves. They're being wined and dined and really having a good little time of it. So, let's see how things go once the sister has dolled herself up and is going to make the rounds with Chapter 2. Precisely at 7 o'clock, we presented ourselves at the Commandant's. Mary, looking very pretty in her transparent white dress, brilliant sack of Tunis silk, and necklets and bracelets of coral and palm seeds. The little thing had such loving dark eyes, such a soft bloom on her cheeks, and such a sweet mouth that I could hardly blame the General for wishing to have her sit beside him at dinner. The Commandant, being a little shy, would have given up all his privileges as host, but the General insisted upon the Commandant leading her in, and she sat between the two. It was very mortifying for the Capitan and the Lieutenant. The former made an effort to be complimentary and entertaining across the table, but the latter... We are very cat-heavy day today. But the latter looked quite crestfallen, and hardly raised his eyes from his plate. When we retired to the drawing room, matters went a little better. The tame gazelle was brought in for Mademoiselle Marie to see, and while the General and Commandant had a long discussion on military affairs, the rest of us sported with the pretty creature and made pleasant plans for the morrow. Then, an amusing game of cards was set on foot, over which we were growing very merry, when up came the General and the Commandant. "Eh bien," said the General, slyly nudging the Capitan. "We have not been so engrossed, but we heard one or two pleasant things talked of. Upon my word, Capitan, I am half disposed not to go to Mascara till after your picnic to the waterfalls." "You will do my poor little fate great honor, mon General," answered the Capitan, adding naively, "but I think that the wild geese flying northwards means rain." "Not a bit of it. We shall have no rain until a fortnight after Christmas. Mademoiselle Marie, I shall do myself the honor of offering you one of my horses to ride." "Mademoiselle has already condescended to accept mine," the Capitan put in, with stiffness. "Mademoiselle Marie, this gentleman has no horse fit to carry a lady. The brute he offers you has no more mouth than an elephant. Keep on the safe side and ride mine, which is a lamb, I assure you, Mademoiselle, a lamb." The General spoke in jest, but the Capitan was very near losing his temper. Mary, being thus appealed to, thought to extricate herself from the difficulty by declaring herself half afraid to ride either horse, being an inexperienced horsewoman. But both the gentlemen had mules, and both the gentlemen's mules were the best. Poor Mary colored, and looked at me in despair. "I think," I said, "the safest plan will be for my sister to try the horses, and see which suits her the best." Then the different routes to the waterfalls were discussed, and the different douars or Arab villages where it would be best to have a difa, or feast, provided. Mary's judgment being asked in every instance. All this time, the lieutenant had turned over the leaves of a newspaper very meekly, and the commandant had caressed his tame gazelle. As soon as she could politely free herself, Mary went up to him. "How pretty and playful and fond it is," she said, stooping down to stroke the little creature. The grave face of the commandant brightened. "Yes, it would be very triste here without the little thing." "Do you never go to France, monsieur?" "I shall perhaps go in 2 years' time. But you see, mademoiselle, that is a long time to look forward to, and if my mother should not be living, I might as well stay here." "Do you like fighting the Arabs in the desert, then, monsieur?" "Mademoiselle, when one takes up the profession of arms, fighting and exile are choices entre nous deux. I often sigh for a settled, domestic life. But I might have been worse off. I might have gone to Mexico, for instance." The commandant's manner was so simple, so manly, and so tinged with sadness, that I think any woman would have sympathized with him as much as my little sister Mary did. She, poor child, having lived all her life in a schoolroom, was quite ready to make a hero of any man that smiled kindly upon her. And here were 4 heroes in handsome uniforms, all smiling upon her at once. There was the sweet sense of youth drawing her to the lieutenant, but I think the commandant stood next in her favor, and she could not for a moment forget the courteous kindness of the other 2. "It must all be a dream, Tom," she said, as she gave me her good-night kiss. "But oh, if it is a dream, don't let me wake yet." We dreamed some wonderful things in the next few days. Dominique made us get up one morning very early and drove us in his little wooden gig to an Arab encampment miles away in the desert. It was dawn when we started, and large pale stars were shining in a violet sky. Then, like a gorgeous butterfly emerging from a dusky chrysalis, came the eastern day, and we felt as if living in a world warmed by 100 suns. Was the air, the warm, intoxicating light took possession of our senses, and so sweet, so rarefied, so indescribably delicious was the air, that it seemed to give wings to our dull bodies. Every now and then we were overtaken by clouds of locusts, their little wings glistening like diamonds against the sky. Flocks of starlings darkened the air, or a serried line of wild geese passed majestically overhead. Then we came to the tents, and at our approach 12 dogs rushed out to snap and snarl, and 100 little naked children scampered and scuttled across the way. A stately Bedouin made us welcome, and while Dominique transacted business with him, his women gathered around us, chattering and grinning like children. Then we were feasted upon couscous, soup, and figs, and took leave, after many assalamu alaikum. Another day we went out hunting gazelles, bivouacking along a riverside and feasting, Arab fashion, off a sheep roasted whole. Dominique had found a very pretty little French girl, daughter of a traveling farrier, to act as Mary's handmaid, and she now felt less isolated among so many men, and less shy too. The poor child stood a fair chance of being spoiled, what with suddenly finding herself transformed from a schoolroom Cinderella to a fairy tale princess, and having 4 lovers, all heroes at once. But it was impossible to deny that the general, the commandant, the capitaine, and lieutenant all behaved like lovers, presenting her with jackal skins, ostrich plumes and eggs, rare birds, and other treasures of the Sahara. The general went so far as to give her a little Negro boy about 10 years old, though this gift we had accepted only temporarily, not quite knowing what to do with him when we left Tashum. Yeah, that's... Okay. Okay, General. Sure. Christmas Day came at last. Mary had artfully evaded the delicate point about horses by declaring herself afraid of everyone's beast but Dominique's. Accordingly, mounted on Dominique's ugly hack, she led the way with the General, her long, bright hair flowing in curls over her shoulders, her cheeks glowing with excitement. The pleasure and picturesqueness of the last few days, for Mary had an artistic perception of beauty, had brought out a new side to her character, and she quite surprised me, from time to time with her saucy humor and quick repartee. We made a brilliant cavalcade, what with the uniforms of the officers and the richly embroidered saddles and bright red burnouses of our attendant spahis. After riding some miles across a monotonous tract of stony desert, we came to a majestic sierra of crag, down which fell a dozen waterfalls, narrow and bright as sword blades. A thin little stream threaded the ravine, and on its banks grew clumps of the tamarisk, the oleander, and the thuya, making an oasis grateful to the eyes. Here we sat down and ate our Christmas breakfast, with stray thoughts of village bells chiming at home, and school children lustily singing their Christmas hymns. Our host, the Capitan, had provided a sumptuous feast of desert fare, roast quails and plovers, couscous, figs, dates, and bananas, with the addition of champagne, and we were very merry. Mademoiselle, said the Capitan, I think what our next Christmas will be if you are not here. Persuade Monsieur your brother to purchase some land between Mascara and Tachun, so that we shall not lose you altogether. The General nudged the Commandant. You see what our friend the Capitan is dreaming of, mon Capitan. Your escadron is sure to be sent into the interior this spring. Put all romances out of your head, my dear fellow, and do not entice Monsieur into the committal of follies. I am not the only one to entertain romances, said Capitan coolly. You, mon General, did us the honor to spend Christmas at Tachun. We can but attribute such a condescension to the gracious influence of Mademoiselle. Look well after the Commandant when I am gone, gentlemen, continued the General, looking round with a smile. Matters are gone so far already that he loses his temper if a fellow officer but jests with him. What a terrible slur it would be upon the glorious annals of French African conquest if such a brave officer should show himself fonder of stuffing birds for an English demoiselle than running swords through ungrateful Arabs. And the General looked round with a very comical expression of mock horror. Mademoiselle has indiscriminately accepted our tokens of homage, the Commandant said maliciously. But it yet remains to be seen whose offering has been the most acceptable to her, went on the General, adding, au grand sérieux, we won't resort to duels unless absolutely necessary. This sort of banter lasted so long that poor Mary's cheeks burned with mixed vanity and mortification, and she made an excuse to leave us. And what does our lieutenant advise Monsieur to do? Asked the General. To settle here or to follow his escadron to the desert? Whereupon the poor lieutenant colored and said nothing. Man knows he's out of his league. What an experience it was, that Christmas day in the desert. The noonday sun seemed to dissolve in the warm atmosphere, and instead of a single orb shining overhead, large and golden, we had melted suns innumerable about us, and almost lost the sense of corporeity in their charmed medium. When the short bright day waned, and the large stars were coming out one by one, we found ourselves near home, and when the heavens had turned to bluish black, and the stars to splendid silvery moons, we passed under the gate of Tachun, and saw our shadows, darker and deeper than real things, fall across the white walls of mosque and fortress. Shadow and substance lost their identity in the desert, and one is always on the point of mistaking the one for the other. If anything, shadow is the more real of the two. So absorbed was I in the suggestions of this mysterious beauty that I had forgotten all about my sister's lovers till we were fairly in our little sitting room. Then Mary began to sigh and blush, and to hint that she thought we had better leave to Shun very soon. "You see, Tom dear," she said, with tears in her eyes, "the General says he adores me, and the Commandant says he never loved anyone in the world until he saw me, and the Capitan says that if I go away he will blow his brains out, and what am I to do?" "And the Lieutenant? What did he say?" "He says nothing," said Mary, looking down, "and," here came a sob, "and I like him best of all." "But if he does not declare the same liking for you, we must leave him out of the question, and choose between the other three, I suppose." "He does not speak because he is too modest. I'm sure he likes me," Mary added, still ready to cry. "His state of feeling does not help us much, unless expressed," I replied. "Meantime, what am I to say to the General, the Commandant, and the Capitan if they ask to marry you?" The little thing plucked at the folds of her riding shirt in the greatest perplexity. Hold on. So, context here before we continue. Remember, the General is, pushing 60. Context. Just a note. Just an observation. Okay. Carry on. "I like the General, and I like the Commandant, and I ought not to dislike the Capitan, but I cannot marry one without offending the others. And if I were to marry out here in the desert, Tom, would you stay too?" We had been living in such utter fairyland lately that I felt as if it were quite possible for me to marry some brown-skinned, soft-eyed Rebecca and turn Mahometan. Mahometan? But in any case, could I desire for my sister a happier fate than to marry one of these brave gentlemen, and live in the sunny South all the rest of her days? She would be rescued from a life of toil and friendlessness, and have another protector besides her bohemian of a brother. "My dear child," I said, "it would be impossible for me to say that our lives should be spent together, but you may be quite sure that nothing would utterly divide them. The chief point is, of all your lovers, whom do you love?" To this question, I could elicit no positive reply. Mary, in fact, was half in love with the General and the Commandant, and wholly in love with the Lieutenant, and was quite incapable of deciding her own fate. "You must not laugh at me," she said simply as we bade each other good night. "It is so new to me to have lovers, and so delightful that I wish I could go on forever being happy and making them happy, without marrying either." Then she blushed and ran off to bed. The next morning we were taking our early coffee, when we heard the clatter of horses' feet, and looking out, saw one of the General's splendid brown-skinned, red-cloaked Spahis dashing into the town at a furious rate. He pulled up at Dominique's door, and, letting his little barb prance and rear at will, looked towards us, showing his white teeth and waving a letter in one hand. I left my breakfast and ran down to him. We exchanged salam aleiks, and then he put the letter in my hand, adding in broken French, "Le Général, envoie cela, la faire, la guerre, la bosse." Then he put spurs to his horse's flanks and dashed away as fast as he had come. See, when it's specifically broken French, I got that. We're good. Try and have it be anything even close to fluent? Nope. Out of my depth. Sorry. I broke the seal of the General's letter, which ran as follows. "Monsieur, this morning at daybreak I received a telegraphic information that a serious rising has taken place among the tribes southwards of Big Gig, and I have resolved to march upon them without delay. Judge, monsieur, how more than sorry I am to be forced to quit the society of your charming sister and yourself without making my adieu. But a soldier's duty forces him from the consummation of his fondest desires, when such a consummation seems close at hand. And I go, if not with joy, at least without soldierly reluctance. I shall never forget, monsieur, this episode, an oasis in the desert of my military life, and, while wishing for mademoiselle and yourself all possible prosperity, I hope you will remember Tishun, and the poor exiled officers there, who will never think of you both without regret. I feel it right, under the grave circumstances of the revolt, to advise your speedy return to Beskara, and will order a trusty escort to be in readiness for you when you shall require it. Meantime, receive, monsieur, the expression of my utmost esteem. de Marion. We were both of us talking over the astounding contents of the general's letter when Napoleon came in, full of news. The insurgents numbered thousands, and there were skirmishing parties close to Tachun. Tachun would be most likely besieged, as it had been more than once, etc., etc. As the day wore on, the excitement increased. Little groups of French or Jewish shopkeepers collected together and talked gravely. Arabs walked about in stately fashion, smiling superciliously. In the French camp, it was the old story on a lesser scale. And there was mounting in hot haste the steed, the mustering squadron, and the clattering car went pouring forward with impetuous speed. And so great was the need for hurry that we doubted whether we should see either of our gallant hosts again. Late in the afternoon, however, the Capitan paid us a formal, sentimental visit, and after him came the Commandant, who stood up before us, square and stiff, and stammered out a word or two with tears in his kind eyes. Mary held out her little hand, but he seemed overcome with shyness or sadness, or both, and rushed away without having taken it. Last of all, when we had quite given him up, came the poor lieutenant. He had been busy on 100 errands for his superior officers, and had only 5 minutes to spare. We can never do anything with a few last moments, and Mary and the lieutenant had not a word to say to each other, though I could see well enough what both would fain have said. So I quietly left them under the pretext of fetching a cigar, and when I returned at the close of the 5th minute, all that was necessary had been said. We then embraced each other after the hearty French fashion. Mary and the lieutenant exchanged rings, and he went off to fight the disaffected Arabs as happy as a king. It was a fine sight to see the troops march out of Tachun. Color is really color in the South, and the lines of blue Zouaves and the crimson spies against the mellow afternoon sky were vivid and picturesque beyond description. On they went, arms flashing, drums beating, colors flying, till the last column had turned the hill, and then evening came on all at once, and we felt a dreary sense of disenchantment creeping over us. It was as if we had been dreaming during the last few weeks, and now we were waked indeed. Dominique recalled us to ourselves with a cynical smile. "Aha!" he cries. "It's all play. Let them pretend to put down an insurrection as often as they please. It is good for trade and promotion, and the Arabs know how to defend themselves." But events falsified this sarcasm of Monsieur Dominique's, for the insurrection proved serious, and it was months before we heard of our lieutenant. When we did hear, the news was good, and the news of him and of his English wife, dowered by a Vittoria Colonna, has been good ever since. End of book 1. Okay, so that was not quite the direction that I expected the Christmas in the Desert to take, but there was description of a Christmas. There was a feast. There was, making do with a home away from home. And in the end, Mary had a little bit of a, she had 4 paramours, and then eventually one new husband. And all the while, the artist patroness, absent, but, doing her thing, providing all the money. So, it do what it do. Yeah, you're right. It had Christmas, it had a desert. The label didn't lie. There just were no surprises. Aside from maybe the fact that probably 2 gentlemen that were far, far too old for Mary were courting her, and 2 that were more appropriate in age were, well, the youngest of them ended up winning her hand at the end, but yeah. When the general started coming about, it was like, ooh, we're getting into creepy territory now. But I'll not judge. So this was all a very So to look back, I enjoyed this collection of stories. While it wasn't quite as multicultural as I might have expected or hoped for, it did have the different sort of vibes, and you got glimpses of different perspectives of Christmas and the holidays in general, and just snapshots of different lives. So it wasn't bad. It was a nice little way to go about it. I think the branding as a collection of Christmas stories might be a little strong of a word, but yeah, I liked this one. It was a little bit more serious than some of the things we've read, which is fine. We had a long month of very decidedly unserious readings, so having one that was about half serious was nice. Was nice. We'll be getting back into that after the holidays, so we gotta ease our way back into proper readings, right? But yeah, this was a good find. I rather enjoyed having the option to read more works, and we'll definitely be coming back to this probably next year, with some of the other volumes. Probably not all 3 of the other volumes, but we'll be hedging our bets and keeping expectations appropriately leveled. But it is good that we've got so much still in the pipe. So we have one reading left before the holiday. We'll be reading the Christmas poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," on Tuesday. It will be a very short night because, as you're aware, that is not a long poem. And that'll probably be for the best. We'll have a nice short one. We'll call it an early night and disperse for the holidays. I did figure out how to run things on loop and did some minor edits to clear out some of the early early transition points of the videos. So on probably Christmas Eve, I will start a looped playlist of all of our holiday readings. So there will be something on the channel. So if you have a hankering for some Christmas stories, as we are very, very seriously in the season, they will be available all day long through, I think, as I was counting it up, we've probably got about 24 hours worth of stuff. So we'll get we'll get run through it twice and be like, all right, cool, done with Christmas Eve, done with Christmas, and we are good. I may interrupt the playlists at some point and have Night Before Christmas play at appropriate times. We'll see. It should be short enough. I might clip it and have it run in between each of the sessions just for transitions and fun. Yeah. Anyway, I don't do a whole lot of video editing, so this will be a little bit of an experiment. And by video editing, what I really mean is I trimmed the beginning off, and that was about it, really. It's shocking how it can. There's some real processing time involved with these. I mean, figure each of our recordings for our regular sessions, if we hit around the 2-hour mark, usually clocks in at about 5 gigabytes. So there's some chunk going on. There's some storage issues. The new NAS is being put to very good use already. Excuse me, what? Camera? Tracking? What? Well, I guess I'll not lean back while I'm taking a sip from my mug. Otherwise, things get a little silly. Alright, guys. So, yeah, that was a thing. So, let's go ahead and break for the night. I think we can pat ourselves on the back. We've had a very full month of very seasonable pieces. I have not felt this much in the spirit of the holidays in a very long time. I usually try and stay at least neutral to things. I do my best not to be a humbug, because that's rather gauche, but to at least coast along. But this year, I'm feeling much more holly and jolly. I know it was an intentional effort on our part by going through the month like this, but you know what? I can't say that I don't like it. Next year, we'll probably trim it down to a week, 2 weeks of readings in the holiday season. Doing the full 3.5 weeks was a little much, but I'm feeling it pretty well this year. And yeah, you're right. It's what it takes. A little bit of intentionality goes a long way. You need to make a conscious decision to get into the spirit of whatever season you're going for. So, our seasonal readings are very much fun. October, spooky season, I was all for it. And yeah, I was just thinking of other things, like of movies and things to feel appropriately fun. There's so many Christmas movies. It's a lot easier to find Christmas movies to fill the time than it is to find Christmas readings. That is for certain. Ugh. If only we could just do watch-alongs. I mean, we could, but that would be far less. It'd be fun, but yeah, not really my vibe right now. Alright, guys. Let's go ahead and skedaddle at this point. We've had a good month. We've got one night left of seasonal reading on Tuesday at our normal time. It will be a short one. I may just run through it twice, honestly. I don't know. We'll see. And we'll then break for the holidays. We'll be back probably on Thursday, or not Thursday, Friday. Thursday's Christmas. We'll probably be back on Friday. I don't know what we'll read yet, but I don't have much better to do, honestly. So there is that. So, all right. As always, thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to drop a like on the stream and maybe you subscribe to the channel. Let the algorithm know that we're doing some fun things around here. And until next time, have a wonderful evening. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and good night.